Are you paying attention to what I'm saying now? What about right now? And now? I want to talk about attention span and what it actually is and why sometimes we think we don't have it. And specifically, what about kids? Are kids really suffering from low attention spans? And if so, why? And in order to do this, we're going to talk to a scientist. I saw Emma Louth's TED Talk about attention span in kids, and I was like, okay, we've got to talk. She is working as a pediatric research scientist, so she is really focused on this conversation, specifically the differences in the neural mechanisms behind learning and memory and attention spans, but both in animals and in humans. So she kind of looks at those little small differences and extrapolates from there. And I'm really interested in what external forces are making us lose our focus and our attention versus what is inside of us as humans who grow up in certain environments. Like kids that are digital natives, is there something different about their brains than my brain, which grew up in an analog world? These are all things that I'm really curious about. Emma, thank you for being here on Swell. And I know that you are in Europe someplace. I think you are in Denmark. I don't know. Please correct me. I hope you're well. And I want to jump in, obviously, because I see that you have a consultancy company that you are in the business of explaining life to people like us. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your work to speak with us. I guess my curiosity is when did you realize that the brain was going to be your focus? And was there a particular event in your life or a study that you did that said to you, wow, neuroscience is my thing?
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for having me. And that was a really great introduction. I can confirm that I am in Denmark. I live in Aarhus. It's a city a few hours away from Copenhagen, and there's a lot of exciting neuroscience research that goes on here. For me, my interest in the brain and neuroscience, in general, I've always been interested in research that has an impact on people's everyday life. I've always known that that's something I wanted to be a part of my research focus. And the thing that really turned me towards the brain and neuroscience was when I was working as an intern with a speech pathologist who specialized in toddlers with autism spectrum disorder. And so when I was working with her, I don't know if you've tried to capture the attention of a toddler before, but capturing the attention of one with autism is a real challenge. And it turns out the answer was soapy bubbles, like the bubbles that you blow at a park. Yeah, that can really actually get them to pay attention to you. But, then I started asking, why? What is it about the bubbles that manages to capture their attention and gets them to focus? And what can I learn from this to use when we're trying to actually, work through some of the speech exercises to get them to focus on the task and to be able to work and have a better outcome with their speech abilities. And as soon as you start asking these sorts of questions of why, what is it about the bubbles or what's going on in the brain that's allowing them to focus on that and not other things, that you start to go down this rabbit hole and realize how complex these questions actually are, that there's really no simple answers. And the next thing I knew, I was focusing on neuroscience, and all my research was about the brain and brain development, how our brain develops to be able to learn and pay attention, and what can influence that. So that resulted in my PhD being about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or fetal alcohol syndrome, as a lot of people still call it, where children exposed to alcohol in the womb, how that affects their ability to pay attention, and what we can do to sort of help them to better be able to pay attention. And from there, it's just always been about this attention and learning. So that's how I got into neuroscience.
First, I would like to say thank you, Deborah, for having Emma talk about this. I just find it really interesting, being a teacher and all, that it is very true that toddlers are really, really focused when I go ahead and during the summertime, I have them play with bubbles. They're really, really intrigued. There is a lot of times where kids are very used to also listening to the same book over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter like whether there's pictures on it or not. They're really engaged when it's something they like and there's repetition. So I don't know too much about science or anything like that, but I do notice that if it's something that they're really intrigued by or they're very curious, that becomes like a really big focus for them. So thank you for having Emma come on, and I would love to actually hear you guys talk more about this. This is actually something very interesting. So thank you for sharing.
Hey, Ms. Marina, thank you for the gratitude. And Emma, thank you for coming on. And it's really so important to connect some of the dots that you're connecting. And specifically, you're talking about just the idea of bubbles and delight and the concept of play. And it's why the video industry, the digital world is so seductive and so attractive to young kids. Probably because everything has the arc of drama, the arc of play, the tangible reward systems, the bright lights, the immersive experience. Those are all things that pull kids in a digital space that really are big success stories. And do you think that, from your experience, Emma, are we heading towards a real battle between the real world and the digital world when it comes to developing a child's mind? And is there an optimum time for a child to not have access to the digital space so that they can fully form in the real world? And is that unrealistic? And what if you had a magic wand, what would you prefer to happen to a child's exposure to the digital world? Would you like it to be at a certain age when it's most safe? And what would that age be? And where do you handle these kinds of conversations in your career? Are you confronted by this in your practice and when you do research and you're trying to figure out, these things are true, what as a society are we doing about it? I just love your opinion about the concept that we might have as lay people, that there's sort of a war going on between the analog and digital space.
Hi, Deborah. I think you really hit the nail on the head here with what is the biggest concern to parents and people in the field of child brain development nowadays. And it's a really tough question. I mean, I'm home with my 3-month-old right now, and sure, it's easy enough for me to avoid screen time here at home, but what about when she goes to daycare or school and other kids have smartphones and iPads? Or if I'm, on a car ride 2 hours up north to bring her to visit her grandparents, am I going to just give her a phone because she's screaming? Or am I going to manage? I don't know. We'll see, but it's definitely the biggest concern right now. And it's just as you say with the bright lights, it's constantly triggering this reward system, and they're constantly rewarded for switching between, different apps, different screens, seeing the next thing. So the question is, what is this doing to their brain? And thing number one, there hasn't been too many studies on this. The oldest generation that grew up with smartphones and technology, they're in their early 20s. But from what we have with studies, we see that children who have more screen time, they tend to have lower scores on attention tests, so sustained attention, being able to focus for long periods of time, which of course affects how they're going to do in school. They tend to multitask more. In terms of whether or not that makes a lasting change to their brain is a totally different question and a very hard one to answer. But it definitely messes with their learning strategy. They like to switch constantly, right? They're not used to staying focused on one thing. So that can definitely make it hard for them in school. But the big thing for me, I think, is to do with socialization. There's been one study, a small study, I should say, in about 47 kids, preschoolers, that they found those with the increased screen time had less white matter in their brain from a brain and imaging study. And white matter is it has to do with the connectivity in your brain. So less would suggest less connectivity. And at that age, white matter is also highly correlated to socialization. And so this is important because when they're interacting with screens, they're not getting the same feedback as you would interacting with either a parent or another kid. You're not seeing all these different facial expressions. You're not getting this variety of language from interacting with all these different people. And you're just especially not getting that feedback. And so they also find that children with increased screen time have differences in socialization. And I think this is really one of the most worrying things to do with screen time. As well, they found some issues with increased screen time and sleep. But the whole thing is a really hard question to answer because when it comes to screen time, is it all equal? Is it the same? Is it just about the amount of time? Does it matter if you're looking at a computer or a phone? Or does it matter if a parent's sitting there interacting with you while you're using your iPad? So, it's a really hard thing to try and find a group of people with the exact same digital experience. And so that makes it hard to create these studies and really figure out what's happening. As well, of course, you have some positive benefits from technology. It's not always all bad. There's some, cognitive behavioral therapy can help with sleep. We have a video game that's been approved to help with the ADHD. So it can help in some ways, but honestly, from what the research says, it looks like it does more harm than good. So the official American guidelines for how much screen time a kid should have under the age of 2, none. From 2 to 5, 1 hour. If I could do what I wanted, I would say, kids shouldn't have screen time in general until they're at an age to really understand what it is, at an age where they are decently well socialized, maybe the age of 7 or so. But I don't have a good reason for that number. But, it's not easy. And so as I say in my TED Talk, we need to find some ways to integrate. But of course, I think overall I'm going to try with my child to limit screen time as much as possible. And as to whether or not we're at war, we are at war already with, raising our kids analog or digital. And it's not going to be easy.
Hey, Emma, thanks so much for this perspective. And there's so many perspectives around the digital world and how young minds interface with it. I wanted to round this conversation out with a bit of advice from you. As you research and find out different things about focus and attention span and young people, for parents who are looking to really be active with their children, really side by side, supporting the fact that they're of a different generation, supporting what really are the demands of being young in this world, and helping them along in succeeding. Do you have any tips, like a punch list for things that you've discovered from a neurological perspective for parents to see if their children are really suffering versus just a kid in the 21st century? Like, are there ways for a parent to observe their child because they have a glimmer that maybe they're not doing great, but they don't want to pathologize them and name them and give them a disorder? But can you give some tips on how to assess a child's ability to focus and enjoy life in a single lane? And if a parent is questioning it, what's the punch list they can look at to say, I think my kid's okay, or no, I want my kid to be checked out? Because I think a lot of parents want to know, is my kid okay? Am I paying attention to signs? What are those signs? Is there a discrete list that you can kind of give? Or I know you don't want to be in a position to take responsibility, but is there something you can help a parent out with they're trying to decide, is my kid okay? Thanks so much for this. And this is an open conversation now, so hopefully some new voices will come in.
Thank you, ladies, for this wonderful, insightful swell, very appropriate for the times that we live in. I have a question about the future of attention spans. Given the fact, and to frame that question, I have to take you back into the past. go back into the 50s and 60s with the advent of television, there were the naysayers. If you go even further back, the advent of radio, there would have been people, or the advent of theater, any such new introduction to either technology or an art form or something new was always met with resistance, with problems, with the statements being the alternatives are always better and so on and so forth. Yet, because such inventions, discoveries, developments were so good, people got used to it, adapted to it. So people got used to mainstream television. Then mainstream television crept into our everyday lives and they got used to it. Then came the computers. People got used to it. Then computers crept into our mainstream lives. They got used to it. Then the mobile, I don't want to belabor the point. As it stands today, mobile technology and everything is an integral part of our lives. And so is it not possible that we also will get used to it in a few years' time? That few years could be 5 years, could be 15 years, I don't know. Until the next big thing happens and the entire attention span or the lack of it will focus there. And so all these studies right now, and I mean no disrespect, just to say, I'm just having this discussion from a purely philosophical / academic understanding standpoint. So that all the studies may not hold true, because what it means today as social interaction did not mean the same 50 years or even 20 years back, and clearly will not mean the same 20 years into the future. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think it is something that will increase, as in the lack of attention span, and what is the threshold for it then? And if not, then will it circle back to longer attention spans, as many things have happened in the past? They take a full circle, as has happened in, for example, fashion trends, polka dots and bell-bottom trousers and, those kind of things, and broad ties and what have you. They have resurfaced from time to time. Music has been following a similar pattern. So why not attention spans? I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent there, but I hope you get the drift. Thanks.
Hi, Deborah. I think it's a really good question and a really hard one for parents to consider. Okay, when should I go talk to a doctor? Or, is it just a part of growing up? Because, kids, they develop at very different rates. Some things they're going to pick up super quick. Other things, it takes them a bit longer. So it's hard to tell. And, of course, I would just suggest, as a parent, you know your kid, and you can always talk to, the teacher, the people who see them every day. And of course, if you're concerned, talk to your doctor. But in terms of a clinical checklist, I'm not a doctor or a clinical professional, so I wouldn't want to speculate on any clinical signs. But one thing I will mention that you as a parent can always look out for is, how are they sleeping? Because sleep, it starts a whole cascade of events. Children, teens, even us adults. If we don't get enough sleep during the night, you'll do worse on a test of attention. And so, when we talk about technology, that's one of the major sort of sleep disturbances we have nowadays, is using these screens with blue light right before bed. It can sort of mess with your circadian rhythm a bit. And especially for kids, look and see, okay, are they using technology right before bed, or do they even have their phone in bed with them? And maybe, if they're not sleeping, try that first. Try, getting the phone out of the bed and not having sort of the blue screens maybe a good hour or two before going to sleep. But otherwise, unfortunately, I don't have an answer. So hopefully we have a doctor on here that wants to comment and bring that further. But I'm so glad that we've had this talk. And it's good that it's open for other questions. I can see that someone's already applied with actually a really spot on question, so I'll reply to that as well. Thanks, Deborah. Hi there. This is such a good question, and I think it's a very timely question, because Deborah mentioned that I'd done a TED Talk, and in that I talk a little bit about how the fact that Gen Z, the ones who have grown up with technology since they were little, they're now entering the workforce, and how it's not really an environment made for them that have grown up with all this technology, where they see all the possibilities that how we can use all the smart tech to be more productive, and how we can integrate that into the workplace. And of course, it's met with a lot of resistance. And I think you're quite spot on there saying, will we just get used to it? In that sense, I think we will. In 5, 15 years, whatever it may be, we're going to see more technology creeping into the adult life, for sure, and the workplace. But when it comes to kids, I don't know. I still think that when we're talking about very young kids, even you use the example of a television, we still suggest limiting screen time, and that includes TVs, for example. And because we're talking about how their brain is developing, in those first few years of life, their brain is undergoing so many changes, and we want to, of course, set them on the best path. And so now, where we have these apps and different programs where they can actually interact to some extent, we want to make sure that they're not replacing real life interactions, right? Because they can't, because you're not getting that same socialization, you're not getting the same facial expressions when you're interacting with an app. And so I think to some extent, it's a very important conversation about what we're doing with kids and how much screen time they're getting. But like I said, I also think you're right in that we will integrate more in the future.
Emma, this is so great. Thank you for being so present here. And I just appreciate your spontaneity and responding so quickly and being so clear. And you triggered another question I'm just going to keep on asking. And that's the nature of Swell. And let's see, it's so expansive. So here we go. You mentioned the devices and kids and going to sleep and the sleep pattern specifically. Can you talk, it's a little tangential, but can you talk about any hacks from a neurological point of view for sleeping? Because I know from the perspective of neuroscience, you look at sleep as sort of a bodily function. And what happens to our neural pathways when we sleep, and the importance of cleaning our brains and all that. But we hear so much about sleep hacks and sleeping pills and sleeping tests. But because you look through life through that lens, I'm wondering if you personally have sleep hacks to help the brain do what it needs to do. Asking for a friend.
Hi, Deborah. Man, I really wish I had a new sleep hack that no one's ever heard of. But if you've read up on sleep hacks before, keeping your bedroom dark and keeping the temperature cool, that kind of thing. Of course, they're all good advice. I think what I would suggest, if I was to pick two things that were really key, the first would be consistency. You just going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, including weekends, and making sure that during the week you are actually getting a good amount of sleep, because you can't really catch up on sleep by just sleeping in on weekends. There's been studies, for example, with teenagers. They had teenagers and they gave them a test of attention at the beginning of the week, asked them how rested they felt, that kind of thing. And then throughout the week, they were only allowed to sleep 5 hours a night. And so then by the end of the week, they did another test. And of course, they found that their sustained attention, their ability to pay attention over a long period of time, was a lot less. And they, of course, felt very tired and wanted to sleep. And so on the weekend, they were allowed to catch up on sleep as much as they wanted. And so on Monday, they tested again. And of course, they were feeling well rested. And so those symptoms were gone. But the sustained attention scores had not fully recovered. So it's just an example of how you can't just catch up on sleep and expect all those cognitive functions to really be able to come back. So you need to consistently get a good amount of sleep. So I would say a regular schedule is absolutely one of the most important things. And then the second thing I would say would be to create a bit of a routine. If we're talking about trying to fall asleep, for babies, for young children, we create a whole bedtime routine for them, right? We get them a bath, we read them a book, put them in their pajamas and put them into bed. And so that gets them into this sort of mindset of, okay, I'm going to bed. And for adults, it doesn't need to be necessarily as long and complicated as that, but maybe just making sure that you take half an hour before bed to wind down. And in particular for us adults, I think it's trying to get your mind to turn off, to close all the tabs that are open in your brain on all the things that you need to do tomorrow. And to do that, maybe it's writing a to-do list for the next day. Maybe that's part of your wind down routine. Or just making sure that you have answered all your emails before going to bed, because if there's emails that you need to write in the morning, those things are spinning around in your head, and it can be part of the reason that it's hard for you to fall asleep, because you have all these to-do lists that are just constantly going through like a ticker tape in your brain. Okay, I need to do A, B, C, and it can sort of stress you out and make it very difficult to fall asleep. So making some sort of routine that puts you in that mindset, that puts you in that more relaxed state, whether it's meditating or even just reading a book, doing something else before bed. I would say those two things, consistency and routine, are going to be the things that make the biggest dent in trouble sleeping.
Hi, so I've been loving the conversation, the back and forth, and I would say I definitely agree with the routine and the consistency. As a teacher, we have to have like a set schedule and we have to follow it. If not, the kids get cranky and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So routine and consistency are definitely a big major part of just, them going to sleep and having a nap time. So we try to encourage for the parents kind of to do that at home as well. So there is, again, that consistency. So I definitely agree with that 100%. And as an adult myself, I would pretty much say that I actually have my own little like bedtime routine too, because I want to make sure I get my 8 hours or even 7 hours, whatever works. But sometimes, those things don't happen, of course. But I do keep that in mind, and I feel like that's something that's very important, like in general. So, thank you. Like I said, I'm so glad these conversations are coming up, and thank you both so much.
Hey, I just want to agree with you about the routine aspect and echoing what Emma says. I think, we have to just commit to it, because the routine really does tell our cellular body that it's going to expect things at the right time, in the right environment, and get the right fuel it needs and nourishment it needs. And I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to commit to my to my routines, because it sounds easy, and then it's hard to really commit to it. But yeah, it's just awesome to hear it from a neuroscience perspective. It gives me more confidence. Thanks.